Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We come now to question 74 from the Westminster Shorter Catechism. The last time, unsurprisingly, we covered question 73, which asked, what is the eighth commandment? And we shouldn't be surprised at this point to know that the next question, question 74, asks, what is required in the eighth commandment? The answer given by our fathers in the faith is this: the eighth commandment requires the lawful procuring and furthering the wealth and outward estate of ourselves and others. The eighth commandment requires the lawful procuring and furthering the wealth and outward estate of ourselves and others. Now, before I begin to look at this at some detail, I want you to notice something very, very important. It's what underlies this commandment, or maybe another way of putting it is what necessarily flows out of this commandment that we not steal. That is, this commandment is dependent upon the idea that we have a right to private property. That ought to tell you something. Long before communism affirmed that it doesn't believe in God and that belief in God was unhealthy and wrong, it already defied God in affirming the notion that private property was somehow problematic and wrong. That's not the Bible's posture. Some of you may know that the very first book I ever wrote was a book on biblical economics. It was first titled Money Matters. Its second title was Dollar Signs of the Times, and its ongoing title since then has been Biblical Economics. Well, in that book, it's true. It's not a surprising or shocking accusation when people say, "Oh, you wrote this book to prove that God's a capitalist." Well, I wrote the book to unpack what the Bible has to say about economic issues, and one thing is abundantly clear: the Bible is in favor of private property. And once you have established that, you have already established a profound hedge and wall against government control of economic decisions. You know, when I teach ethics to my students at the local community college, I know instinctively, that is their instinct, not mine, I know that they are instinctively statists. They are generally socialists of one form or another without even necessarily knowing that that's the case. But despite that, I always ask them this question: do you believe people should be free to make their own economic decisions without government interference? Do you believe that people should be free to make their own economic decisions without government interference? And of course they all say, yes, we should. I say, okay. Suppose I come to one of you and I ask, hey, would you be willing to come to my house and clean out my gutters? I've got a fear of heights, but I got a good ladder and my gutters are all clogged up. I'd be willing to pay you $5 an hour. And I said, suppose you were willing to do that for $5 an hour. Anybody have a problem with that? Well, no. I said, yeah, they decided they would be willing to do that. I decided I'd be willing to pay that. Where's the problem? Well, the problem is that if we did that, we could both go to jail. Because the law requires a minimum wage. which is north of $5 an hour, and seeking to head north always more. So, all of a sudden they realize, wait a minute, when we do things like pass minimum wage laws, what that means is we're interfering with people's free economic decisions. You see, everybody, wherever you are on the political spectrum, they want to be free to make their own decisions. But they also want to impose their wills on others. Well, this commandment here comes to us and tells us when it comes to private property that we, A, have to behave in a lawful manner, and B, we need to be busy about the business of procuring wealth, that is, gathering it, bringing it to ourselves, owning it, and furthering wealth and the wealth situation for ourselves and for others. Boy, isn't that great that our fathers recognize that our free economic decisions are not zero-sum games. That it's not the case that what I gain, you lose. And in fact, when you and I trade, if we both trade freely, listen to this carefully. If you and I engage in a trade without any coercion, without any lying, both of us will profit. Both of us. How do we know that? Well, because before the trade, let's say that whatever I have, we'll call it A, whatever you have, we'll call it B. Before the trade, I valued B more than A, and you valued A more than B. But I had A, and you had B, so we each had the thing we valued less. I hand you A, you hand me B, and boom! We both have the thing we valued more. Both of our outward estates have been improved. The law against theft, friends, given from God himself in the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, the law against theft ensures that God wills that we be free to make our economic decisions ourselves, without coercion, whether from thieves or from the government. In the not too distant future, or perhaps in the not too distant past, depending on how things shake out, I will be doing a curating your book library segment on the book The Proximity Principle. This is one of very, very few business books that I've ever read, but it was recommended to me, and as the name suggests, a big part of what it says is who you're close to can make a big difference in your future. Well, it's consistent anyway, if not cause and effect. At least it's consistent to think through that principle and to apply it to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast. And you may have noticed, if you've been listening for some time, that I have been making a self-conscious attempt to increase the number of interviews that I have on this program. That I have, of course, lots of Lisa whenever I can, but also other guests on the program. It really struck me that, well, let me put it this way. I have been known to suggest that in the Reformed world, I am something of a Forrest Gump character. Not too bright, but really intersected with a lot of people, and were at a lot of critical moments in history. I was blessed to attend the Cambridge meeting, out of which came the Cambridge Declaration. I was there for the very first Congress on the Bible and the last Congress on the Bible. And of course, I knew many of the movers and shakers in the evangelical world. And some of those will be people that will show up in these interviews, but also lots of ordinary people that you may not know about that I'd like you to learn from. I've been telling you over and over again how much I desire to have, as much as is possible, this program to be a conversation. That's one of the disadvantages of podcasting versus radio. On radio, you can have call-ins and back and forth and all of that. And I suppose there are ways to do this that might be able to capture some of that, but when you listen on your own time, we don't have that opportunity. So I don't have that opportunity, but I do look for ways to, again, have conversation. It's my contention that education, in fact, is conversation. As you should know, we're committed here at Dunamis Fellowship to the idea that discipleship, growing in grace, is what we're all about. We look at that in terms of our homeschooling. We look at that in terms of our new initiative of shepherding under shepherds. And it's also true here. We want to have conversations, which is, again, one of the reasons why we do this segment. And finally, a little bit around halfway through, I let you know, yes, you stumbled into another appeal segment. It really helped me that, one, the same fella who is better than all the rest of you combined in providing feedback when I ask for it, when I asked some time ago what are some of your favorite segments, actually mentioned the appeal segment. He said it made him feel like he knew what was going on and where we were headed, and it was helpful and encouraging for him, and that helps me to continue to do this. So here we are talking about talking with each other, and in the context of that, I want to talk to you about giving and support for Dunamis Fellowship and for the Jesus Changes Everything podcast. One of the things that comes with an attempt at more interviews is we could use some significant technological upgrades. One of the reasons why I sort of diminished the number of interviews that I did for a time is because I didn't feel competent and comfortable with respect to the process of getting decent sound. I still don't like where we are, but I think we're in a place that's good enough to send out at this point, but we'd like to get better still. We would love to have better equipment, maybe even better training for me so that I know what I'm doing, and all of that requires some financial support. So here I am once again asking, would you please prayerfully consider how you might support the work of Dunamis Fellowship, including the work of the Jesus Changes Everything podcast. Oh, by the way, I don't know if any of you saw this, but our other podcast, Ask RC, had a record-breaking day a week or so ago, when I sought to answer the question, why do people leave the evangelical church? And I apparently stepped on some significant toes. I've looked back at what I've said and what I've done, and I reached the conclusion that what I said is offensive in the sense that it's going to bother people, but I don't think I caused offense in the sense that I was unduly inaccurate or unkind. But it's actually, in some level, a positive thing to know that I've got that many people in this perspective tuning in and hopefully, again, hearing the gospel preached. So that's what we continue to be about, conversation. You'll see more of that. One of the new segments that we're adding is called The Gospel at Work. And this segment will involve conversations with different people in different jobs on how the gospel has impacted the work that they do. So please stay with us, pray for us, support us if you can. Again, very, very easy. rcsprolljr.com. Right there on the front page, there's a donate button. Click that and it will work. Also, if you have questions, comments, feedback, conversation, you can always comment right below wherever it is you're watching this or listening to this rather. Or you can, if you like, send us an email at rcjr@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to take a look. Thank you again for listening. Several times in the past few weeks when I have come to the Forever Friends segment, I have covered friends of mine from the time that I was a student at Grove City College. And either not too long ago or coming up soon, again, I don't remember precisely when it's going to be scheduled, I did a Curating Your Book Library segment on a book called The Proximity Principle by Ken Coleman, which argues that the people that we spend time with that we're near can make a big difference in our future. And I think it's interesting that those things come together, because today on my Forever Friend segment, I'd like to speak about someone whose proximity I came into through no choice of my own, but who nevertheless was a dear and is a dear and kind friend. To do that, I need to explain to you a little bit about how things worked at Grove City College. Grove City had local fraternities. They weren't part of any national fraternities. They weren't allowed to be. And those fraternities had many of the traditions of fraternities and sororities. But they had this other thing that were just called housing groups. And I ended up, as a sophomore and through my senior year, being a part of a particular housing group. What that meant was a housing group was a group of people who were assigned a particular block of dorm rooms, and who typically would field intramural sports teams and maybe host dances, similar things that fraternities would do, but with none of the hazing or the rich old tradition or any of that. It was just friends who hung out together. And I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago my dear friend Dr. Bruce Goodrow, and how we roomed together for 2 years. Well, the sophomore year that we roomed together, that was our first year with the Tri-Rows. Row was the name of this particular housing group that we were a part of, which, by the way, still exists. Well, we were new to the Tri-Rows, and we knew that we were going to room together, and we were placed in a double room which had a single room off of it that had been secured by an older student. And he, wasn't part of our choice about who we were going to room with or room near. We were suite mates, not roommates. And he chose us to be his suite mates because he was a fan of my dad's. His name is Charlie Chase, and Charlie actually, I believe, works at Grove City College right now. I know that his wife, Michelle, is a professor of chemistry there. And Charlie, I didn't know until my sophomore year. Now all of a sudden we're suite mates. And we had, a lot of differences between us. Charlie was certainly more, what's the word for it? Pious, maybe. I don't mean it in a negative way. He was a more pious Christian than I was, no question about it at that time. And he was more studious, maybe a little less interested in sports. Those kinds of differences were very real. And yet, we became friends. We became genuine friends, and remain so to this day. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. One, Charlie was is a sweet and gentle spirit. He was just friendly. He wasn't angry or mean or anything of the sort. Actually, he was our suite mate our junior year too, now that I think about it. Charlie had a generally speaking generally going easy disposition. Now, he could get riled. He's the kind of fella that if you poke him just the right way, you can get one of those little veins in the forehead to start throbbing. And because I wasn't very pious and could be a real jerk, sometimes I had fun making that happen. But I like to think that I did it in fun, because I really did and do like Charlie. Charlie was so very much in love with Michelle, and she was a year or two older than him, and multiple years older than me, and so and also again very studious. That's how you become a PhD, as she has. She sort of, well, we were like bad younger brothers to her, but she was patient and gracious and kind with us as well. But again, at the end of the day, I think that my favorite thing about Charlie was just that he cared. It's so easy for us to be cynical and sarcastic, and even when we have differences, to just write people off. But Charlie, he cared about me. He cared about Bruce. He cared about other people on our hall. And he had the character even to, approach me about some of my, impious, attitudes or behaviors. He would, and it was a scary thing because I could be, snarky, but he would come to me and say, "Hey, RC, I think you're doing this. Should you be doing that?" And, he had the ability to poke my conscience, where it needed to be. And I think it came out of, again, his genuine caring. Charlie, I am going to try to get this to you, as it is my habit when I do these. I think I should be able to track you down okay. But I wanted you to hear that I look back at our relationship with gratitude to God. I am grateful, and I am sorry for all the snarkiness and other unkind things I've ever done, but I want you to know that when I look back, I think about you, and when I think about Michelle, I just think, what a great couple, what a great pair of people these people were. So I love you, I miss you, and I wish you and Michelle all God's blessings. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.